Now, this game was played between FMD Pest, who is Rashid Ishak, against me. I was playing the Caro Kann defense here, playing as black. It was a bullet rated game, played 3 weeks back. In fact, if you hover onto the name now, I have a score of 2-0. So I have defeated him twice now in the bullet chess. The first time, actually, this was the first time probably, and the second one, the game I had, I won on time, to be precise, like 14, 15 seconds on the clock, but I was pieced down. Now, this game, I was materially better as well, or I should be saying positionally better. And this game was very nice to begin with, so I thought I'll share you guys this game. So it starts off with Rashid playing e4. I respond with c6. My standard response to e4 is always c6, d5, the Caro Kann defense. So here comes d4. Whenever you get a chance to occupy space in center, opponents will occupy the majority of center. After this, I respond with d5, hitting the center now. And here three options are there, but Rashid chooses to go with knight to c3, which is the main line in the Caro Kann. Other two options, which are one of them is completely fine, which is like you exchange the pawns, becomes the Caro Kann exchange variation, and you both have similar advantage in the center. Like nobody has an advantage; everyone is fair and equal. But more challenging line in the Caro Kann is the advanced variation when the pawn advances, and then you have to make sure your pieces are good to be developed, because once the pawn advances on to e5, knight to f6 is not an option. So you have to be flexible to handle that situation as well when you play the Caro Kann. That's why the advanced variation is the most challenging line. Now, since Ratchet developed the knight onto c3, I take the pawn here, and he takes back with the knight. Again, standard move so far. And in this position, I develop the bishop onto f5, attacking the knight straight away. Knight generally goes back to g3, and bishop comes back to g6. That's what happens as well in the game. Now, if you notice, this bishop is nice, eyeing the c2 square. But whenever you play a bishop backwards, what happens next is the pawn march starts to happen. So h4, which means if h5 is played, my bishop is trapped. So I need to make space for it. So I go with h6, making space for my bishop, retrieval square. Now comes a knight to f3. Now, whenever knight to f3 is played, the next move is generally to get to the knight onto e5, and then attack the bishop, spoil the pawn structure as well. There are two options that you can deal with it. One of them, which I don't prefer actually, is queen to d6. I used to do it earlier because I didn't study the theory properly. So if you play queen to d6, when knight is here, of course, attacking the bishop, and if they take, you take back with the queen. But then the queen gets harassed by the bishop as well. So rather, there's the best move in this position is to play a knight to d7, which defends this pawn, this square directly. Now, if knight comes, you simply take. Opponent takes. You probably trade off the queens as well. Opponent takes, and you castle on the queen side with the rook centralized, giving a check as well. And you have a very nice position to be in. So just in case, here let's go with this line that if the opponent had moved the knight onto here and we take, opponent takes here, we take the queen, opponent takes back, and you castle. This is probably a very nice position to be in because your king is already safe, your bishop is saying this is wonderful diagonal, you are giving a check already. So most likely the way to defend this would be to put the bishop in between, because or the dark square bishop. Only two of the options are there. If you move the king, you lose the pawn on c2 already. So this position is better for black to play. It is completely, I'm not saying it's winning position already, but it is quite advantageous. All you need to do is put your pawn ahead. The e pawn will go to e6, and then you put your bishop out. You get the knight onto e7 and double up the rooks onto the d file, and you are good with an attack. So obviously the opponent's rook is kind of passive here. The other rook still can come out once the bishop gets out here. But then this rook is very sad already. Even if bishop is controlling this to prevent the check, this rook is not coming out anytime soon because king is blocking it, since castling rights are already lost because we trade off the queens. So this can be one of the lines for sure. Let me just go back to the position we were at. So we were here at so opponent develops the so after my move knight to d7, opponent moves the bishop on to c4 here, attacking the pawn on uh, f7, which is kind of normal. And then I played pawn to e6, blocking that bishop's diagonal. Queen comes out on to e2, which is not scary at all. There's no such threats there. I just moved my queen onto b6, which kind of attacks the pawn. Yes, I cannot take because it's defended, but I'm preventing a move like bishop coming out. I can take this pawn next otherwise. So that was the idea behind queen to b6. Opponent plays a c3. I went with bishop to d6. Now again, computer is suggesting that bishop sack is possible here. Maybe it's possible, but my if even the sack happens, I can simply castle and put my rook eventually on the center, which can look nasty as well. So there are always some ideas, even if things go wrong. Also, if it was a bullet game, so we both were playing fast, not the precise of moves. After knight comes in on to e4, I take with the bishop. Opponent takes back with the queen, and now I develop the other knight as well onto f6, attacking the queen again. Now queen goes back onto e2, and if you see, queen has been just moving there, and I got my queen back onto c7, uh, and then opponent plays h5. H5 didn't make any sense at this point of time. Could have probably castled or developed the bishop, which he doesn't go for, and I played knight to d5. Now knight to d5 is played with an intent. If the opponent takes, I simply take back with the pawn, and I'm happy with this position because this bishop looked dangerous. As we discussed, there is a sacrifice possibility sometime or the other. Don't want to go into that line, so just blocking it completely. And if the opponent doesn't take, which of course didn't happen in the game because he's an FM, he won't be trading pieces for anything. Plays the bishop onto d2, preparing to maybe castle on the queen side. That was probably the idea. And in this position, I improved the position of my other knight. Now, knight d7 goes to f6. Again, adding more defenses to my knight as well. Now, bishop goes back onto b3. When bishop goes back to b3, generally the idea is to swing over onto c2, put your queen onto d3, and then go for this checkmating pattern eventually. Of course, the knight has to be removed from there. So I went with bishop to f4 here, asking for a bishop trade, which again is denied, and c4 is played. I take the bishop, opponent takes back with the queen, and now I have to move the knight. I have to save the knight. I go with knight to f4. It's defended with my queen, so not an issue. But if knight comes in between, that can be problematic. So the best move is to probably play knight here, but then I can simply take this pawn, and for the time being I'm fine. But then eventually the knight will be pressurized with a move like g4, and then I really don't have much of an escape square from there on. So that can happen in a game, but here when we go back into our continuation, uh, pawn forward was played first, which was g3. I take the pawn. Opponent now castles on the queen side, and so did I. And then a knight comes on to e5, preparing to go for a fork, attacking both my rooks. But that's not going to happen. My queen is defending it, so I have no problems. But what was scary here was if a move like g4 is played, my knight is kind of trapped. So I have to make a retrieval square for my knight. Knight is only going in one place because if I just move this knight backward, then I'm not making progress in game. So I went with g5 here, making sure my knight has a retrieval square as g7. Queen comes to e3. I get back with my knight onto g7. Opponent plays c5, which was kind of bad. You don't want to block your dark squares where the queen was eyeing already. And in this position, I play a knight to f5. Now, knight f5 is attacking this pawn twice now, and I intend to increase pressure on the same square. And queen goes back onto e2 by the opponent. I can take this. Now it's a fork as well, which means I will have the bishop as well. And in this position, FM Rashid goes out of time as well. So if you see the position wise, also I'm pretty strong here. After bishop is traded, opponent will take back with the pawn, but I have this rook takes as well. There's no threats with the knight too. Knight is will be undefended most likely eventually.